She called me just the help desk in front of 40 people at her firm's anniversary dinner. She laughed when she said it. I smiled and refilled her wine glass. 3 weeks later, I found the texts. The look on her face when the divorce papers arrived at her office. I heard about it secondhand. And honestly, that made it even better. Her name is Carolyn, and for 11 years I thought I was building a life with her. Turns out I was just the background scenery. My name is Warren Hayes. I'm 42 years old. Until about 8 months ago, I worked as a senior network security engineer for a mid-sized defense contractor outside of Arlington, Virginia. Good salary, decent hours, the kind of job that sounds boring at cocktail parties, but pays for a 4-bedroom house in a good school district. Not that we ever needed the school district. That's a different kind of grief I'll get to later. Carolyn was a corporate attorney, partner track, then partner, then one of the names on the letterhead. She was brilliant, in the way sharp things are, brilliant, impressive, until they cut you. I knew that about her. I thought it was just how driven people operated. I made excuses for 11 years. The dinner was a black tie event for the 30th anniversary of her firm. They rented out a ballroom downtown, the kind of place with chandeliers that probably cost more to clean than my first car. I wore the suit she picked out for me, because the last time I wore my own choice, she spent the cab ride home telling me I looked like a regional sales manager at a company that was going under. Her words, we were at a table with 3 other partner couples, and the managing partner himself, a man named Gideon, who had the energy of someone who'd never once doubted himself in his entire life. The conversation was moving the way those conversations do. Big clients, bigger deals, the comfortable sound of people who consider themselves important talking to other people who agree. Then Gideon asked what I did. I started to answer. Something like networks, security infrastructure, federal contracts. Carolyn put her hand on my arm and smiled at Gideon. Warren keeps the Wi-Fi running at home, she said. That's mostly what we need him for. A few people laughed. Not uncomfortable laughter. The easy kind. The kind that means everyone at the table has decided something is true and are just confirming it together. Gideon chuckled and turned back to Carolyn. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. I did not excuse myself. I did not say anything. I sat there for another 3 hours. And I was so practiced at this particular kind of disappearing that I don't think anyone noticed I had gone quiet. That was the first domino. The drive home, she was animated, happy with how the evening had gone. She talked about a conversation she'd had with one of the senior partners about a case she was building. I answered in single syllables. She didn't notice. She fell asleep before I did, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that I lay there in the dark, going back through the last 11 years, like a man reviewing footage from a crime he'd been too distracted to report. The comments had started small. They always do. Early on, when I was still just an IT specialist and she was a junior associate, she'd say things like, I don't know how you do the same thing every day, with a tone that made it clear she thought the answer was that I lacked imagination. When I got my first significant certification, she told her mother I'd gotten a little trophy at work. When I was headhunted and more than doubled my salary, she listened to the offer details, nodded once, and said, well, it's not law, but it's steady. Like I told her I'd gotten a shift at a grocery store. The bedroom comments came later. Not cruel at first, just the slow accumulation of sighs and early sleep and, it's fine, I'm just tired. Until I understood that I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be wanted. The one time I brought her up directly, she said I was being insecure and that I should talk to someone about that. I did talk to someone. My friend Doug. He told me every relationship has rough patches. I believed him because I wanted to. At family gatherings, Carolyn had a habit of introducing me to her relatives with a kind of apologetic warmth, like I was a rescue project that had mostly worked out. This is Warren. He's in IT, with a brief smile at whoever she was talking to. A smile that said, we don't need to dwell on this. Her father once asked me whether I'd considered going back to school for something more professional. Carolyn did not correct him. She changed the subject, which I told myself was the same as defending me. It wasn't. 2 years ago, I was part of a team that identified and patched a critical vulnerability in a federal contractor's infrastructure. It was the kind of work that didn't make the news because it was done well enough that nothing bad happened. My director called it the most important project our division had run in a decade. I came home that night genuinely proud, which by then was an unfamiliar feeling. I told Carolyn about it over dinner. She listened, asked if it meant a raise, and when I said not yet, but likely by Q2, she went back to her phone. I stopped telling her things after that. The firmest memory I have, though, the one that snapped something into focus the morning after that dinner, is from our one real vacation together, about 4 years in. We were in Sedona, hiking. I was happy, actually happy, in the specific way that only happens when you're moving your body and looking at something beautiful and not thinking about anything. I said something like, "I could live out here. Easy. Throwaway." Carolyn looked at me and said, "Doing what?" Not as a question, as an answer. I stopped hiking after that trip, not because of her specifically, but something had gone flat. 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner, Carolyn was at a Saturday morning yoga class. She went every week, 90 minutes, and then brunch with colleagues that usually ran to noon. I had no intention of snooping. I want to be clear about that, because I know how it looks. I had a good reason, or it felt like one. Her phone had been going off at odd hours, and twice I'd woken up at 2 in the morning to find her not in bed, texting in the hallway. When I asked, she said it was a client in a different time zone. The phone was on the kitchen counter. She'd left it there, which she almost never did. I stared at it for about 10 minutes before I picked it up. It wasn't locked. She'd turned off the biometrics for some reason. The most recent thread was with someone listed as B. Langford. I didn't recognize the name. The last message, sent the previous night at 11:47 p.m., read, "Still thinking about Tuesday. Same place? I can move my afternoon." I scrolled up. I'll spare the specific details, because some of them I still can't fully think about. What I will say is that the thread went back 9 months, and that B. Langford was Bradley Langford, a senior partner at a competing firm that Carolyn's office had worked with on several joint cases. The intimacy in those messages was not ambiguous. The logistics were not ambiguous. The references to specific evenings, specific hotels, specific arrangements, none of it was ambiguous. There was a moment where my hands stopped shaking, and that moment scared me more than the shaking had. I became very calm, very focused. I put the phone back exactly where it had been. I poured another cup of coffee. I sat down and thought clearly about what to do next. I did not confront her that day. I waited. Over the following week, I gathered what I needed, not out of revenge. I wasn't thinking about revenge yet, but out of the instinct to protect myself, the way you button your coat before you walk into weather. I spoke to an attorney my colleague had used 2 years prior. I opened a separate bank account. I reviewed our joint finances carefully and transferred a portion of savings that any reasonable assessment would call fair. I backed up every relevant document I could think of. I am a network security engineer. I spend my professional life anticipating how systems fail. I was applying the same mindset to my marriage, and the main thing I noticed was how long the warning signs had been there and how consistently I had dismissed them. Carolyn, through all of this, was cheerful. She complimented my cooking twice, suggested we look at a trip to Portugal for the spring, reached over and fixed my collar one morning with a familiarity that made my skin crawl in a way it never had before. She thought nothing was wrong, or she was very good at performing normal. Either way, I had learned the same skill from 11 years with her. Tuesday came. She left for what she said was a deposition prep session that would run all afternoon. She was dressed more carefully than a deposition warranted. I watched her go from the upstairs window. That evening, I checked the location history on her family account, one of the conveniences of shared devices, something she'd set up herself when she got her first iPhone and wanted me to be able to find her if she ever got into a car accident. The pin dropped on a hotel I didn't recognize in Tyson's Corner. Not downtown, not near any courthouse or office I knew. When she got home, she was describing the deposition in careful detail. I listened with the patience of a man who already knows the verdict. I took 2 more days. I needed them, not for evidence, but for myself. There was a version of events where I had confronted her immediately, said what I knew, watched her react. I chose not to do that. I chose to be certain of my own decision before I made it, because I had spent 11 years being uncertain of my own perceptions, and I was done with that. On Thursday evening, I made her favorite dinner, lamb chops, a salad she liked with pears and candied walnuts, a bottle of Burgundy from the rack she'd always been more interested in than I was. She came home to candles and asked what the occasion was, and I said I just felt like doing something nice, and I watched her face soften in the specific way that told me she had no idea what was coming. We ate mostly in silence. She talked about a hearing she had the following week. I asked a few questions. Then I set down my fork, reached into the folder I'd placed at the edge of the counter earlier, and put it on the table between us. "I know about Bradley," I said. The sequence of expressions that crossed her face was something I will carry with me for a long time. Shock, then the rapid calculation of someone assessing how much I might know and whether it could be managed, then the decision to try tears. "Warren, I have the messages," I said. I was calm. I had been practicing calm for weeks, and I was very good at it by then. I have the location history. I have the hotel charges. I'm not here to argue about what you knew and didn't know. I knew. I'm here because the divorce papers are ready, and I wanted to tell you myself before the courier does. She cried. She said it hadn't meant anything, which is a thing people say when they mean it meant something specific that they regret. She said she'd been under enormous pressure, that making partner had isolated her, that she'd felt disconnected from us. I listened to all of it. Some of it might even have been true. "You felt disconnected," I said. "I felt invisible. The difference is I didn't manage that feeling by lying to you for 9 months. She reached for my hand. I stood up. "You kept telling me for 11 years that I wasn't enough," I said. "I believed you for most of them. I don't anymore." She followed me to the door. The calm she'd had all evening fractured completely. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You don't have any idea what your life looks like without me in it." I picked up the bag I'd packed the day before. "That's actually the part I'm looking forward to," I said. I drove to my friend Doug's place, the same one who told me every relationship has rough patches. He opened the door, took one look at me, and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. He handed me a beer, and we watched baseball until I fell asleep on his couch. That night, my phone registered 46 notifications. I turned it face down and didn't look until morning. The messages cycled through what I would later learn are almost textbook stages. The first wave was distress. She was scared. She didn't want to lose me. This wasn't who she was. The second wave was strategic indignation. I had violated her privacy. I had made a decision without giving her a chance to explain. The third wave was calculated guilt. We talked about having children. We planned a future. I was throwing it away over one mistake, as though the duration of a betrayal isn't part of its definition. The fourth wave, around 2 in the morning, was just, please. I went back to sleep. The following week was what I would describe to anyone going through something similar as the part that tests you. Not the confrontation. That part, despite how long I dreaded it, turned out to be clarifying. It was the aftermath that required endurance. Day 1. She showed up at my office. She told the front desk she was worried about a family emergency. When I came out, she was composed, dressed perfectly, which somehow made it worse. I told her I had nothing more to say and asked her to leave. She did not make a scene. She was too good at public performance to make a scene. She was too good at public performance to make a scene. That professionalism, in that moment, felt like a final confirmation of everything I'd understood. Too late. Day 2. She called my mother. I found out when my mother called me, troubled, telling me Carolyn had said I'd had some kind of breakdown and walked out without explanation. I told my mother the truth, including the affair. My mother was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Warren, I never felt like she saw you." I had not expected to cry on that phone call, but I did. Day 3. Flowers at Doug's. A card that read, "I miss you. Please come home. We can fix this." The fact that she'd tracked down where I was staying registered more as a data point about her willingness to find things out when she wanted to than as a romantic gesture. Day 4. Her assistant called me. I don't know if Carolyn asked her to or if the woman acted on her own, but the message was that Carolyn wasn't sleeping and wasn't eating. I should know that. I thanked her and hung up. Day 5. She contacted my professional network. Not obviously. She was too careful for that, but 2 colleagues. I wasn't especially close to reached out in the same week, asking if I was doing all right, and the only thread connecting us was Carolyn. I noted it and moved on. Day 6. I returned to the house with an attorney present to retrieve my personal items. She was there, which I had anticipated. She'd been crying, which I believed. She showed me photos on her phone from the early years, us at the beach in North Carolina, her laughing at something I'd said. The specific image of 2 people who thought they were starting something good. "Do you remember this?" she asked. I did remember. That was the hardest part of day 6. "I remember all of it," I said. "That's not why I'm leaving. I'm leaving because of the 11 years after those photos were taken. I carried 3 boxes and my grandfather's drafting kit to my car. I did not look back at the house. 1 month out, the practical machinery of ending a marriage was grinding forward. Her attorney had initially signaled a willingness to contest certain assets, but when my attorney made clear what evidence existed and was on record with the court, the posture changed. The settlement process became cooperative in the transactional way that legal proceedings become cooperative when one side understands that continued conflict will cost more than resolution. I found an apartment in a building I'd noticed on the commute for years, without ever expecting to live there. Good bones, south-facing windows, a small den I could use as a proper office. Moving in alone, I walked through the empty rooms and felt, for the first time in longer than I could precisely identify, that a space belonged to me. I bought a couch you would have called too large. I hung a topographic map of the Appalachian Trail above the desk, something I'd always wanted, and had always imagined she'd find pedestrian. I ordered a standing desk and a good chair, and set up the workstation I'd wanted for years. The kind that takes up too much room for a shared space, but is exactly right for your own. Work, in the months that followed, became the first place I noticed the change in myself. I'd been competent for years. My record was good, my team respected me, I delivered. But there was a ceiling I'd unconsciously built for myself, assembled from 11 years of Carolyn's quiet assessments of what I was and wasn't capable of. Without her voice in my head, that ceiling was gone. I led a project I'd been passed over on twice before. I proposed an infrastructure overhaul my director had been looking for someone to own. 3 months in, he pulled me aside and told me I was being considered for a division lead role. I had not applied for it. He told me I didn't need to. I started hiking again. Not immediately. The first few weekends, I just drove out toward the hills and sat in the car in parking lots, which is its own kind of progress when you've been living inside for too long. Then one Saturday, I got out. Then 2 Saturdays. Then I was driving 2 hours each way on Sunday mornings to trails I'd bookmarked years ago and never made time for. My body changed. My sleep changed. Some mornings I woke up before my alarm and felt, specifically, like something was possible that day. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Shaling, Okafor, who specialized in what she called relational trauma. She did not sensationalize anything. She asked good questions. One day, about 6 weeks in, she said, "When you imagine your life 5 years from now, what do you see?" And I sat with that question for a long time, because I realized I'd stopped being able to picture a future at some point and hadn't noticed when. "I see something quiet," I said. "And mine." She wrote something down. "That's a good place to start," she said. Carolyn continued to reach out periodically. The messages shifted from urgent to reflective, then to brief. She'd found a therapist too, she said. She was doing the work. I wished her well and meant it. The way you can mean it about a situation you have no more investment in. 4 months after moving out, I met a woman named Audra at a friend's dinner party. She was a high school history teacher, which under the old version of my life, I might have noted as something to hide from Carolyn. I did not have that instinct anymore. We talked for 3 hours about things I hadn't talked about in years. Trail conditions, a book we'd both read, the specific pleasure of knowing how to do something difficult well. She laughed at things I said without making me feel like she was doing me a favor. We had coffee the following week, then dinner, then several dinners. The first time she asked me about my marriage, I told her the whole story, because I'd learned that the version of yourself you protect is usually the part that needs the most air. She listened without interrupting, asked 2 or 3 careful questions, and at the end said, "I'm glad you got out." Not dramatically, just plainly, the way you say something you mean. I was not yet sure what we were or what I wanted us to be, but I was sure of the feeling of being spoken to like I was worth being spoken to. And after 11 years, that was not a small thing. 6 months after leaving the house, the settlement was finalized. No courtroom. The assets divided according to contribution. The house listed and under contract. The formal end to 11 years administered by people paid to be dispassionate about the things that cost you the most. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon and drove to the trailhead I'd been going to most Sundays. I hiked for 4 hours in the cold. At the top there was a view I'd been working toward for weeks, the kind that makes you understand why people climb things. I stood there for a long time. I thought about the dinner and the Wi-Fi joke, and 40 people laughing because it was easy to laugh. I thought about the champagne I'd brought home the night of my certification, sitting unopened on the counter. I thought about 11 years of being managed by someone who was very good at making management feel like love. And then, the way it happens when something is actually over. I stopped thinking about it. The promotion came through the following month. Division lead, the role I hadn't applied for. With it came a meaningful raise, a team of 12, and the specific satisfaction of being responsible for something I was good at. At the announcement, my director said to the group that I had demonstrated the kind of judgment that builds systems that don't fail. I thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. A few weeks after the promotion, Audra came to watch me lead a team presentation at a company open house. Something casual, low stakes. She just asked what I was working on, and I'd invited her because it hadn't occurred to me to keep it separate. Afterwards, she said, "You're completely different when you're in your element." She wasn't performing this observation. She was just noting it. "Different how?" I asked. "Like you take up the right amount of space," she said. 8 months from the night of the dinner, I found myself at a restaurant downtown for a colleague's retirement party. The restaurant was upscale, one of the kinds Carolyn used to prefer. I was there with Audra, and we were in a good mood, and I was laughing at something she'd said when I looked up and saw Carolyn across the room. She was with a group I didn't recognize. She looked composed, elegant, the version of herself she always deployed for public appearances. She was thinner. She was watching us. She came over after a few minutes. Audra had stepped away briefly. "You look well," she said. "Thank you," I said. "You too." There was a silence that wasn't entirely comfortable, but wasn't as heavy as I'd expected. She asked how the job was going. I told her about the promotion. She said congratulations with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between genuine and the controlled version of whatever she actually felt. "She seems good," Carolyn said, nodding in the direction Audra had gone. "She is," I said. Another silence. "I'm doing the work," she said. "Not fishing for something, just saying it." "I know," I said. "I hope it helps." And that was it. She went back to her table. I went back to mine. Audra returned and asked if I was okay, and I said yes and meant it completely. A few weeks later, Audra and I were hiking one of the longer trails I'd been working up to. A full-day route. A real climb with a descent that required attention. We stopped at a ridge to eat lunch. The afternoon was cold and clear, one of those days that feels chosen. She asked what I was thinking about. "Nothing specific," I said, which was true. I was thinking the way you think when you're not managing anything, not protecting anything, not building a version of yourself for someone else's approval. She handed me half of her sandwich, which I hadn't asked for, and went back to looking at the view. It is a small thing to describe, but for a man who spent 11 years being told, in the particular silent language of contempt, that he occupied too little space and deserved too little consideration, being handed half a sandwich without ceremony felt like the right kind of evidence. The person I was at that dinner, the man who refilled his wife's wineglass after being made into a punchline, that man didn't disappear. He's still in there. But he knows now exactly what he was worth. He just needed someone to stop telling him otherwise long enough to remember it himself. I've thought a lot about why I stayed as long as I did. Not in a self-punishing way. I'm past that. But in the honest way you think about a decision when enough time has passed that you can actually see it clearly. The answer I keep coming back to is this. I confused endurance with loyalty. I thought staying through the small humiliations, absorbing them quietly, refilling the wine glass and keeping my face neutral. I thought that was what a committed person did. What I didn't understand until much later is that endurance without boundaries isn't loyalty. It's just slow erosion. Carolyn wasn't a monster. That's the part that's genuinely hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. She was accomplished, capable, and in her own way she probably believed she was being honest with me. That's almost the harder thing to sit with. The cruelty wasn't cartoonish. It was calibrated. It came dressed as humor, as high standards, as the reasonable expectations of someone who had worked very hard and wanted a partner who matched that. What it actually was, underneath all of that, was contempt. And contempt, once you learn to recognize it, is unmistakable. What changed me wasn't finding those texts, as significant as that moment was. What changed me was the morning after the anniversary dinner, sitting in our kitchen going back through 11 years of evidence I'd been too invested in disbelieving. That's when the real shift happened. The text just confirmed what I had already started to understand. The work, the actual internal work, started the moment I stopped explaining away what I already knew. There's something I want to say about intelligence, because I think people misunderstand what it means to be smart in a situation like this. I am good at my job. I build systems that anticipate failure. I think analytically. I assess risk. I plan. And I still spent 11 years not applying any of that to the most important system in my life. Intelligence without honesty about yourself is just a more sophisticated way of being wrong. What I had to develop wasn't more cleverness. It was the willingness to look at something uncomfortable and not look away. The integrity piece. And I do mean integrity in the plain sense, the sense of being whole, undivided. That came from the decision to leave without revenge. I didn't expose Carolyn. I didn't engineer a public reckoning. I gathered what I needed to protect myself. I told her the truth, face to face, and I walked out. Not because I was above anger, I had plenty of it, but because I understood by then that the life I wanted to build had nothing to do with her suffering. Tying my future to her consequences would have meant she was still at the center of my story. She wasn't. I was. And the resilience, that came from showing up for the small things. The hikes, the new apartment, the couch she would have hated, the topographic map above the desk. These are not dramatic acts, but they were mine, and doing things that were mine, one after another, rebuilt something I hadn't realized had been dismantled piece by piece over a decade. Audra handing me half her sandwich without ceremony. My director telling me I'd demonstrated judgment that builds systems that don't fail. These moments didn't feel like triumph. They felt like the quiet return of something that had always belonged to me. What you do consistently, over time, becomes who you are. Carolyn made a consistent choice to diminish. I made a consistent choice to endure it. Then I made a different choice. That's the whole story, really. The rest is just detail.